Okay, just a happy little smudge right here. Let's bring in the multicolored tool brush as we scroll across. Ah, that looks good. Let's see, what else could we... Oh my God, you're watching me. Oh, God, I hope you don't do that to other people. Okay, anywho, today is a really fun one. Today is where I think you all are gonna feel like you're becoming real programmers today. You're gonna learn how to use conditionals. If and else's, you're going to learn how to take individual key inputs from your keyboard or pick between a left and right mouse click. So strap yourself in, today's a fun one. All right, let's create a new program. We'll call it 4A Conditionals. 4A Conditionals. And as a brief review, let's do our void setup, which is the code that we only want to execute once and keep true for the entire duration of the program. And that's going to be the size of our canvas, 800 by 600. And okay, that's our main setup function. Now let's do void draw. And in here, we put in the code that we execute continuously. I'm going to put my opening and closing brace right from the get-go. Let's go white background. And let's fill with orange. So in case you didn't know what orange is, one of the official RGB values for orange is 255, 153, 0. It's going to create an orange fill. And let's drop an ellipse directly in the center. And one way to do that is do width divided by 2 for the X value, height divided by 2 for the Y value, and let's give it a height or width of 50 and a height of 50. Let's run that real quick. And there you go. Got an orange circle right in the middle. Now, it's time to introduce conditionals. When I click a mouse button, I'm gonna bring in a rectangle. So here's how you do that. You're gonna say if, and then, so your conditional is if these certain conditions are met, do that thing. So you say if, and then in the set of parentheses, we're going to say mouse pressed. If mouse pressed. So when this condition is true, execute the code within the if conditional. So you have to contain your conditional within a set of braces. Now again, here, this might be personal preference. At first, a lot of people find it useful to type their code that goes in the conditional like this, because you can see, hey, here's where my conditional code starts, here's where it ends, but the way it's traditionally done is like this, just so you know. So just a little bit different placement of the braces. Doesn't matter either way. Okay, now if mouse pressed, let's draw a rectangle. You know I'm a fan of rect mode center. Just easier to work with. And I'm going to draw a rectangle. Let's draw it at the center, but I don't want it to directly overlap, so I'm going to go width divided by 2. We're going to go height divided by 2, and then plus 100 pixels. And then I'm going to make it 50, 50. A width of 50 and a height of 50. And let's run this. So now there's my ellipse. Hooray. And when I press the mouse button, it's going to spawn below it because I'm adding 100 to the value. And take a look at this for a second. So some important things to note is that it is true as long as I press a mouse button. Whether I click it, it clicks and disappears. As long as this conditional is true, as long as a mouse is pressed, we execute the code within. So notice it doesn't stay. If I click, it goes away the second I unclick, because that condition is no longer true. The mouse button is not being pressed. Hope that makes sense. And that gets us started. File, save, and let's make it more complicated. All right, time to make this a little bit more complicated. So let's go ahead and save our existing program as, file save as, we're going to call this 4B by Conditionals. 4B by Conditionals. Now, what is a biconditional? A biconditional is a conditional statement that only has two possibilities. It's, for instance, like flipping heads or tails, right? You could say, hey, if you flip heads, you win the game. If you flip tails, you lose the game. Another way of saying that is, if you flip heads, you win, else you lose. Because you know if it's either heads or tails. So you say, if heads, you win. And if you say else, you're automatically saying, oh, it's going to be tails, right? So if heads, you win, else you lose. You don't need to say else it's tails, right? Same idea in coding. So we'll make a couple changes here. Instead of saying mouse press, we're going to say, hey, what if the mouse cursor is on the left side of the canvas? So we're going to say if the mouse cursor is less than width divided by 2. Let's draw this rectangle. All right, so if it's on the left side, draw this rectangle. We're going to say else, and we make another set of hamburger buns. And by the way, notice how I stacked the else. This is how it's traditionally done. You can also do it like that if that makes it more comfortable. You can also do it like this if that makes it more comfortable. But this is the way it's traditionally shown. So let's just do the following. Let's say, hey, if it's on the right side of the screen, let's just wipe out the screen utterly. So let's run this. Okay, here's my cursor. When it's on the left side of the screen, both objects are drawn. It's going to draw the ellipse and it's going to draw the rectangle. But the second I move it past the midline of the screen, they both disappear because my mouse X is greater than width divided by 2, right? I'm on the other side of the binary equation, so to say. So if I'm on the left side, both of my objects are drawn. I'm on the right side, now the else is true. The background, we're only drawing the background, everything else is wiped clean. Hope that makes sense. Let's move on. All right, as I often forget to do, save. So go File, Save to save your previous code. There's no autosave function in processing. We're going to go to File, Save As, and let's call this 4C multiple ifs. 4C multiple ifs. And let's just get rid of this code as it is right now. I'm going to delete everything here and just leave background 255. All right. So what we're going to do is we're going to say if we left click, let's draw a rectangle on the left side of the screen. If we right click, let's draw a rectangle on the right half of the screen. So we're going to say if mouse pressed. Now, we're going to need two things to be true in order to execute this. So mouse has got to be pressed and I'll get into this more in the next lesson, but this is the AND operator it's called. So that specifies that, well, this plus whatever follows has to be true in order to execute the code within your if conditional. So we're going to say if mouse pressed and mouse button equals left in all caps. You have to use two equal signs here. In coding, when you use two equal signs, you're checking the value of a thing. You're saying, hey, is the value of the mouse button equal to left? If you use one equal sign, you're setting a value. I'll get more into this into the next lecture, so don't worry about it for now. I'm just introducing the concept. So if the mouse is pressed and it's the left mouse button, let's do the following. Let's draw a rectangle. So I'm going to go fill 0. And we're going to go rect. And again, I want it to be on the left side of the screen. So I'm going to start it at 0, 0. And I'm going to draw it until it fills half of the screen horizontally. But I want it to fill the full screen vertically. Hope that makes sense. If it doesn't, make sure you pause and make sense of this and really be like, all right, what does width do? And if I divide it by 2, what's that going to do? And where's my rectangle? Have to get this. You have to understand spatial things if you want to move on to more complicated things like game design. It just has to be done. All right, if mouse pressed and mouse button, why do I keep typing a G? And I did it again. Equals right. If I press the mouse button and it's the right button, let's do the following. Let's make the right side of the canvas black. So fill 0, and then now. So this is right side of the screen, so I'm going to start it at width divided by 2. It's going to begin at the top at 0. It's going to fill the full width, and it's going to span the full height. And I have to close off my conditional. So look at our hamburger buns, right? I got an opener here, a closer here, opener here, closer here, and I've closed off my void draw, something I did not mention prior, by the way. Notice that when you put your cursor on a brace, it highlights its complementary pair on the other side. So look, I put my cursor here, this thing highlights here. I put my cursor here, that doesn't work at all. I put my cursor here, there we go. I put my cursor here, this one highlights. I put my cursor here, this one highlights. Okay, let's run it. All right, I left click, yay! I get the left side becomes black. I right click, yay! Right side becomes black. So this is kind of cool. It's like, oh, I'm left clicking, oh, I'm right clicking. And hope that all makes sense. Again, make sure you understand how I use these widths and width divided by 2 and how that was able to achieve what I'm doing. Absolutely integral to doing the more complicated stuff. Okay, one more thing before we get to our assignment. All right, save the previous code, and now we're going to go File, Save As. We're going to call this 4D Multiple Input Methods. And I'll explain what I mean as we go. So let's delete basically all of this stuff. And I'm just going to go with my favorite stupid rectangle mode in the universe, rectangle center. And let's go a black fill. And now, let's do something interesting. First of all, let me show you how to do keyboard inputs. And it's probably just like you might imagine. You're going to say if key pressed, and now here's how we specify which key it is we're going to press. You say the word key, and then double equals, but then the key you're indicating has to be placed in a set of single parentheses. So if I wanted the key to be like letter W, I would go like that. Now, I'm going to introduce you to the space bar. And you might think, do I type the word space in? Actually, no. You just literally enter a single space between the two single parentheses, which took me a while to find online, actually. I was like, how do you do this? But there it is. All right, so if I press the key and the key I'm pressing is the space, let's do the following, and I don't know, let's just draw another rectangle, because that's what life is, it's rectangles. Let's put it in the center, width divided by 2, height divided by 2, and let's make it 100 by 100. Okay, and let's close that off. So now that's what happens when I press the space bar. I'm going to draw, let's run that real quick. So, boom. I press it, a rectangle appears. And if I press it and hold it, that rectangle stays. Let's go a little bit different though. Watch this. I'm going to take mouse input, but I'm not going to take it doing an if conditional. I'm going to run a completely separate function. And there's a function for taking either key inputs or mouse inputs called void mouse pressed. And you notice how that shows up different? Void mouse pressed. And similarly, I can use void key pressed. Now, you'd be like, well, why would you do it that way? You could just do it this way. I'll show you. It has very interesting ramifications. So if I use void mouse pressed as a separate function, a separate method, and I want to specify which mouse it is, all I have to say is mouse button. Again with the G's, what is it? Mouse button equals left. Oh, and I have to use a conditional. If mouse button is left, let's draw the same rectangle. Rect width divided by 2, height divided by 2, and let's make it 100 by 100. Same rectangle. And let's close off my braces. Notice 2 closing braces, one for our if conditional, one for our void mouse pressed function. Watch this. Okay, again, if I press the space bar, rectangle shows up. Now watch what happens when you press the mouse button. And I don't even know if YouTube's going to catch this. I can press it and hold it, but it disappears immediately. If I use mouse pressed as a conditional, just like it is with key pressed, it would stay true. Because as long as that conditional is true, the code underneath it is executed. But when I use mouse pressed or key pressed as a separate function, when I use the mouse pressed function, it only executes that thing for a frame. This is super important. You'll have to understand it, and there's more ramifications to this. The main one being that these things can take multiple inputs at once. And I'll get to this when we get to game design, but what that means is that if you try to make a 2-player game by both players, like let's say you're making Pong and both players have an up and down key. If you do it with conditionals, what will happen is it's only going to accept one input at a time, which means only one player can move either up or down at a time. If you do it like this, then it can take multiple inputs at once. So super important you get this. Again, I'm introducing it. We'll get something more complicated in the future. But now, here's your assignment. Ready? This is the fun one that I showed at the start. I want you to make a paintbrush program. Here's how it works. If I left click, I'm going to color it in with black. If I right click, I make an eraser. If I center click, I'm going to draw a variable color that changes from left to right as I move across the screen. So again, this one's hopefully going to make you scratch your head a little bit. And then finally, if I hit any key on my keyboard, everything clears. So take your time with this assignment. Notice that each assignment I give gets progressively more complicated. You might have to refer back to old videos. And as I always say, do your absolute best. Rack your brain over this. It's more important than the lecture itself. When you can start solving problems with your coding, then you're really getting what you've learned. All right, answer shortly. All right, folks, it's answer time. So first thing, let's go File New, and I'm going to call this 4E test, or maybe Basic Paint. Basic Paint program. And I'm first going to draw a canvas, void setup, and that's going to be size 800. And I made a square canvas in the example I showed you, so I'll do the same. Now I'm going to put my background in my setup because I don't want the background to keep constantly refreshing. That's not going to leave a trail of ellipses behind, which is my paintbrush, right? Something else I'm going to do to make my life simpler now, if you recall I did this in an earlier video, is use no stroke. So that way I don't have any black border around any of the ellipses I draw. And I think that's good for my setup, so I'll close that off. Now for void draw. And let's see. So let's just start with our conditional. We're going to say if mouse pressed and mouse button, did it again. I don't know why I typed G's. Mouse button equals left. Let's do the following. Let's draw a black ellipse. So we're going to say fill 0. And the location of the ellipse will be dictated by the X and Y coordinate of the mouse. And I'll make it 50 pixels by 50 pixels. And let's close this thing off and run it. And bring this over here. And there you go. When I left click and drag, I paint, which is pretty cool. And yeah, this is kind of how a basic MS Paint works, by the way, behind the scenes. which is super cool, right? It's a little easier than you think. Of course, the way they coded it is more complicated than this. It's easier to do things with the tools you have today, but same ideas. All right, so I made a black ellipse. Now let's make an eraser. Well, an eraser is just drawing with a white ellipse, right? And as opposed to typing all this I can use copy paste. So Control C all of that, Control V all of that, and look, I don't like my alignment. Control T. Ah, that looks better. Okay, now, mouse button is equal to right, and we're just gonna go fill 255. Okay, so now left click and drag. I have a black paintbrush. Right click and drag. I have my eraser or white paintbrush. Pretty cool. Okay, now the multicolored paintbrush. I'm gonna do this in a cheap way. First of all, let me get rid of that space. Okay, now Control C, and I'm gonna Control V here. Control T to line it up. And now I'm gonna change this to center. Now, that multicolored effect, well, I'm gonna, again, the cheap way I'm gonna do this is I'm just gonna say I'm gonna take the X coordinate of the mouse, divide that by 3, so that way it doesn't get completely red until I'm all the way to the right. And I want this kind of color mixing effect. So I'm gonna go 0, and you could make this way more complicated than this. I'm just giving a very basic answer. So now what's happening is when I center click, the blue value is maxed out always, because the blue value, RGB, the blue value is 255 the whole way through. What's happening is the red value is gradually ramping up until I move across the screen. And it doesn't get maxed out until I hit 755 pixels to the right, because 755 divided by 3 is 255. And then now, the thing I don't get is this should look more like purple, but it looks pink. Red plus blue is purple, not pink. Purple looks more like in here, but I mean, it's right. I don't know why it looks like that. Okay. Now, finally, we made the canvas clear when we press the space bar. Now, I could do that by using another conditional here, but just to practice doing this another way, we're going to go with void key pressed. And then I'm going to say if key, let's do this right, key equals space, we're just going to wipe the background clean. Background 255. And then close off our if, close off our key pressed. Let's run it. So there we are, painting here, painting here, painting here, and I hit spacebar, wiped clean. Yay! Pretty cool, right? I think this is, again, maybe the first assignment where you're like, okay, there's a little bit more to think about. And all right, next time I'm going to get into doing variables, and it's another one of my favorite things because I'm going to teach you all how to create motion using recursive variables. And that's the basis for, well, how you're going to create Pong later on. And that's it. Again, check out my book if you want to buy it. It's in the description. A link to it is in the description. And that's it. Let's keep moving forward and get you to the point where you really feel like you get coding. All right, bye-bye.